embarrassing the Democrats on that. It's the same thing with immigration. No matter what happens with sanctuary cities, of the most brutal gang members, in the case of Officer Sinjo, who is a Mexican mafia guy, this MS-13, going after sanctuary cities, nobody wants that. Make Democrats take tough votes. Throughout this entire border saga, Mitch McConnell has refused to make them take a tough vote, except for the stupid Trump amnesty deal. I just don't get it. But what's the one vote they voted on? They passed an amendment expressing the sense of the Senate, urging Trump not to undo the positive gains in Syria and Afghanistan. They won't put troops on our border. They won't immediately bring to the floor a bill overriding the New Mexican governor's decision to pull back the National Guard, which, Congress could override that. Remember, the governor controls National Guard, but then it also, the feds control them too. They could override. Nothing. It's all about Kabul. Because, again, that's also the feel good. We have to feel for other people. Kabul. It's all identity politics. Why we have to care more about Kabul than our own border. Well, because we can't care about it, because then it's going to implicate the illegal immigrant agenda, and it's identity. We can't mess with that. That's really what this is all about. Truly unbelievable if you think about it. So I figured I'd have on today, as we still catch up on the news from our honeymoon vacation, still behind. Like I said, I want to keep you guys on the cutting edge, and obviously I'm still catching up myself. So some of you guys are even ahead of me in the news cycle. Figured I'd have on someone who's always going to be an expert on this issue. We've just had him on a couple weeks ago, got a lot of good feedback, and figured we'd go for round 2 in the second half of today's show. Mark Morgan is very unique because he really has experience that lies at the nexus of what we're talking about today. And that's the convergence, really, of border security and interior enforcement, how it's all an external threat of criminal alien crime, transnational gangs, and cartels that really, in my view, are a greater national security threat to this country than Afghanistan or anything going on in the Middle East, yet we refuse to treat it as such. And Mark spent 3 decades with the FBI. By the way, served in the hot spot of El Paso, Texas, so very familiar with the dynamics of the border. He served in the LAPD, which, by the way, is very much a hot spot for gang activity. And then, under Obama, in his final year, he became the chief of Border Patrol. What better person to have on today to discuss the latest developments than Mark Morgan? Hey, Mark, great to have you back a second time in just a few weeks.
Thanks, Daniel. I really appreciate you having me on.
Okay, so, I just want to start off, generally speaking. I'm having a very hard time understanding why, even when it comes to Republicans, you don't see the sense of urgency when it comes to national security related to immigration as you see related to other things. So there has not been a single vote under the Republican-run Senate on sanctuary cities on anything with border unless it has amnesty in it. But yet this week they had an amendment vote expressing their sense that Trump shouldn't pull out from Afghanistan because that's a national security problem. Why do you think our politicians cannot view this in the prism of national security?
Daniel, I think that's the question, right? And I think that's why I am so frustrated, because I'm not a politician and I don't want to be, but I do have a layer of law enforcement expertise that you described. So from that prism, I can't understand it. I do not get it. And part of, sometimes when we talk is, hey, can we put this amnesty aside for a moment, and let's just look at this from a national security standpoint. So let's just do what we need to do to protect our border security. Let's do that, and then separately, Congress can deal with this amnesty. I don't understand why it has to be all or nothing, and that the safety and security and sovereignty of our nation is held hostage by this amnesty issue. It's beyond frustrating.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think identity politics has a lot to do with it. What I wanted to go today is on the interior of the country. So when I was out this week, one of the big stories in my view that I think, I had hoped that once I came back from my trip, this would have been the top news story, but it's really been forgotten. The MS-13 gang-on-gang attack in broad daylight in a New York subway. We had the sheriff of Yuma County on the show last week, noting that he could trace a paper trail from Yuma County. Most of the illegals now, because they're Central Americans, unlike previous waves, they don't stay near the border. They go to the East Coast, a lot of them. He was tracing it to North Carolina. There's a lot of activity in North Carolina now, but certainly places like the big cities like New York City. My concern is that people look at this and they're like, oh, yeah, there's always big cities, New York, Chicago. You have, gang shootings. But to me, this is this is not domestic. This is an external threat that you now have gang-on-gang, cartel on cartel, almost like Mexico-style violence in our country. Isn't this much broader of a problem than simple, local crime?
Daniel, that's absolutely right. And make no mistake, MS-13 is the most violent, prolific, transnational gang this country has ever seen. I led that task force for the FBI in Southern California back in the early 2000s. It was prolific then, and it still is today. And it is in countless cities throughout this country. It is a real problem, and you're absolutely right that organic problem that now is in the U.S. started externally from Central American countries, and it's still there, and they're still coming in. And I do not understand why Congress will not stand up and identify this as a problem. And you and I have talked. You've talked about making the cartels a designated as a terrorist organization. Well, the MS-13 as part of that, it's absolutely a significant threat in this country. It's throughout this country, and it's real.
Yeah, what strikes me in this case, in particular with this 26-year-old illegal, is that there's one thing if you want to say you want unlimited legal immigration. Okay. Then another level that even illegal immigrants you don't have a problem with, evidently. But if someone is here illegally, pursuant to law, you have a very easy tool to deal with, and that is a tool that's actually mandatory to deport them. So if you are catching a guy that's arrested for DUI, assault, drug trafficking, it should be a no-brainer that the first time we catch you, you're out of here. So therefore, any subsequent crime by nature is completely avoidable when you're dealing with an illegal alien. American, look, it's catch and release. People are in and out of the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, they're back on the streets. We have high recidivism rates. But when it comes to these guys, they should be taken out. It turns out this guy had 9 misdemeanors and 4 felonies. And the NYPD, it seems, if they're telling the truth, not only didn't they turn this guy over to ICE, they themselves never bothered to track his immigration status. Is this something you saw a lot in your days in LA and elsewhere?
Well, yes, and it's just growing, right? And it goes back to what you said, and this is why I'm hoping that State of the Union address specific on immigration resonated with over 70% of Americans, because, Daniel, just as you said, this is absurd. This is just common sense, right? This is not complicated. This is, if someone's in this country illegally, they're a known gang member, and they're arrested for a crime, yet they're not removed immediately. That's absurd, and it makes no sense. How many more angel families are we going to have to create at the hands of illegal immigrants, and a lot of that at the hands of sanctuary cities, because we had them. They were arrested. We knew they were here illegally, but because of the policy of sanctuary cities, not only are they released, they actually go against ICE. They actually try to thwart ICE from doing their job, so that someone that's here illegally has just committed a crime as released back in the community to do something like this. makes sense. And it's not complicated. You get arrested, you communicate with ICE, you're detained, ICE removes you. It's that simple, Daniel.
And that's what I'm saying. Every illegal alien crime by definition is avoidable because they shouldn't be here if we had border security. But at least numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 should definitely be avoidable, because if you're here illegally and then we arrest you for something, then certainly you should be out of here. I mean, everyone should agree to that. And I'm just finding what's interesting is the left likes to obscure the debate on the degree of criminality and the severity of the problem we have from crime for illegal aliens. They say, oh, no, it's not that much crime. Really, you have ICE, picks up 2,000 homicides within 1 year, 50,000 assaults, 75,000 drug trafficking incidents. But what I found interesting is those numbers are likely a fraction of the universe of criminal alien crime out there. Because like you see from this story, most illegals live by definition in sanctuary cities because that's the push-pull factor there. And they're not turning them over. I don't know if you saw last week, ICE apprehended 118 in New York, many of whom were child sex offenders that went in and out of NYPD without being turned over.
Yeah, Daniel, I'm hoping that's one of the reasons I'm not here, that the American people see the absurdity to this. And it absolutely... You try to be apolitical, but you can't reach any other conclusion that this is identity politics. When, as you said, put aside the securing the southwest border, but once we catch them, they've done something wrong. They've broken our laws again, besides being here illegally, and we have them. But yet we do nothing. We allow them to continue to be in this country illegally, and I just don't know how anybody can say that makes sense. And it's an easy fix. But again, I still have a lot of friends that are chief sheriffs in law enforcement. I mean, ICE is being kicked out of jails. ICE, again, police departments are being told from their government to virtually take. There's been cases, I know you've heard of, there have been cases where not only did they not coordinate with ICE, they kick ICE, out of their jails, but then they actually sneak illegal immigrants who have committed a crime out the back door to actually avoid being apprehended by ICE. It's just absurd.
Yeah, so you're saying it's meaning really illegal alien crime is more redressable than citizen crime. It should be certainly the number one priority of the feds in particular, because it is an external threat by nature. But they're actually making it harder now because it's becoming such a protected class, whereas other people, maybe there's a certain degree of criminality we would finally go after them for. Here they're going to protect them. What I found very telling about this New York Post article, and we're going to link to it in show notes here, about NYPD covering up, the guy's immigration status. They note here that according to the records, 5 of this guy's, 5 of his arrests are sealed. I don't understand how we have sealed documents on arrests of illegals. It's like we have laws that they're not allowed to be here. And yet somehow when it comes to this law, it's almost like the rules of the road don't apply. We treat them as if they're citizens and they're able to remain here. One other thing I wanted to get your comment on as a former border chief, connected to this. I saw at the State of the Union, there's this new fad where certain Democrats bring illegals into the Capitol building, flaunting them at the State of the Union address, bringing them as guests. A U.S. Code 1324 has a number of sections on transporting, harboring, inducing aliens to remain and reside in the country illegally. Now, whether this exactly fits it, I don't know, but it's certainly close. I don't understand how we just as a society let that go on.
Well, Daniel, again, I think what I hope that this shows some people is identity politics, right? And it's one thing to disagree, but it's one thing to take that extra step to, like you said, like almost throw it in your face, but like dare somebody to actually enforce the law. I absolutely, I didn't get any more angry than when I saw certain people in Congress stand up and cheer for themselves, right? They cheered for themselves that they were elected into Congress. But when the president was making the case of all the drugs coming in at the hands of the cartels, the gang members coming in, and the devastation being caused, and talking about how the cartels will exploit young women and children and bring them across the border to be sexually exploited for their lives, they sat on their hands. It was unbelievable to me, but that's where we're at. That's where we're at. That they will hold on to their identity politics and put that above and clap for themselves, but they won't do what's right to protect this country and, quite frankly, protect the innocent victims from other countries coming here. It's absolutely absurd.
You know, speaking of that, allowing politics to ignore your solemn duty to protect the nation. I know you saw my article on New Mexico, Hidalgo County in the Boot Heel. New Mexico wasn't always a hot spot. You always heard about the other three border states a lot more over the last number of decades, but the last few months it's been inundated. It looks like Sinaloa has really targeted that Boot Heel for their trafficking activity. You have a lot of ranchers speaking out how they have drug trafficking taking place, a lot of thefts, people sleeping in their barns. I'm looking right now at a letter written by the county manager, and this is a county of 5,000 people in 5,000 square miles. They have 4 sheriff's deputies, and that's it for the entire county. She talks about sanitation being a problem where they use these porta potties and have dirty toilet paper all over the place. The smell is horrific. They're worried about diseases because there's TB coming in. There's that story with the flesh-eating bacteria that came in at Antelope Wells in that area as well. To me, our purpose as a federal government and then as a state government is to protect communities wherever they are, certainly if they're at the border, from health concerns, from criminality, emanating from the exterior. And yet, did you see the fact that the New Mexico governor said that there is not an emergency crisis at the border that warrants the asinine and anti-American, anti-immigration tactics endorsed by the president and his minions? And then she now says she's pulling out the National Guard from the border.
Yeah, I mean, so here's when I said, and I just scratched my head, because how many more facts do we need to present? Seriously, how many more? 2011, 2017, Texas arrested 180,000 illegal immigrants and charged them with over 300,000 crimes, and they had state charges and convictions of 119,000. The President of the State of the Union talked about the thousands of American citizens have been died at the hands of illegal aliens. He talked about the opioid crisis and the drug overdoses, and 90% of heroin comes, from south of the border, as well as fentanyl and other drugs. We could go on and on and on. And when I read that article, I've talked to the ranchers. I've been there. I've had dinner with them. I sat with a whole bunch of ranchers and had dinner at their ranch. And this is all just more facts that adds to the problem that is not hyperbole, it's not manufactured, it's real. So, how do you go forth with an argument when you have fact and historical data on your side, and one side just ignores it? They just ignore it. I mean, how do you have a negotiation with that? I don't know.
Yeah, I thought this was particularly jarring because I've never seen a border governor, she's newly elected, just completely deny. This wasn't coming externally from Washington. This was her own county manager of that county. And that county, it was very interesting, is it's predicted, or it's voted for the winner of the presidential election every election since 1932. So it's very much a down the middle of the road swing county. They're not all conservative. I don't even know if the county manager, she might be a Democrat, because I know they have a lot of Democrat officials there. And they just say, hey, we have major issues here. We have such few resources. Could you speak a little bit to the need of why we need the National Guard now and paint a picture for our listeners. What exactly happens when the cartels shove 300 people at a time, when every juvenile has to be screened for health concerns? A number of them are being taken to the hospital. What that does to our infrastructure?
Yeah, so Daniel, that's a great question that is not asked enough. Because so let's take a look at that last caravan where 300 came over. So each sector, right? So there's sectors along the southwest border, and then each sector has kind of like satellite office. They call them stations. When you have an influx of a couple hundred, 300 asylum seekers, they're just coming, giving themselves over. Those couple of stations, they're tapped out. They're done. I mean, if you think about that, for not only safety concerns, because you really ultimately don't know what you have for safety concerns, you've got to make sure that you have enough Border Patrol agents to handle that flow safely. And then you just address the other issue. I mean, every one of them has to be processed and screened and vetted medically, their documents, their story, their asylum claim, right? That takes, I mean, hours and hours and hours. And then some of them come up with medical conditions. They have to go to the hospital. 2 Border Patrol agents, gun-toting, highly experienced Border Patrol agents that should be on the line are taken off to go to the hospital. It takes a tremendous amount of resources to handle that. And guess what? The drug cartels have a coyote that's a couple miles in the interior United States watching this whole thing, right? And they see the Border Patrol totally inundated and consumed by the asylum seekers, and they just radio, because they're pretty sophisticated, into the coyotes and crews, and they sneak through drugs and folks and et cetera that shouldn't be there. It's not complicated. And the cartels are exploiting that every single day. The cartels, they want this. They want this humanitarian crisis. They want us to remain weak. They want these asylum seekers to continue to come across the border, because it inundates and takes up the Border Patrol resources to do a humanitarian mission, and they're off the line. That puts our country in danger.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, describe a little bit more about what it means to be off the line here, because, again, they're saying there were 26 instances over the last 3 months in just this New Mexico boot heel, where 100 or more were shoved over by the cartels. And, gosh, the hospitals are at least 100 to 200 miles away in many cases. So you're saying per individual taken to the hospital, you're taking off 2 agents for that entire duration, that whole trip.
That's correct. That's absolutely right. They're here illegally. We don't know what their story is. So it just, common sense, right? Every law enforcement agency in the United States will tell you that's just kind of standard protocol. You got to have 2 for 1, to go. And so it takes them off the line. And what I mean by off the line, and so when I was chief, I referred to this humanitarian crisis, and we did kind of a study, and we made it equivalent to agent man hours. I was actually pulling equivalent of thousands of agent man hours off the line of enforcing the border from bad people and bad things to come in to do a humanitarian mission. So you got to remember, it's not just getting them at the border, it's also taking back the stations and processing them. And remember, part of the Flores case and other bad judicial precedents, I mean, the level of care that's forced on the Border Patrol agents is unbelievable. I'm not making this up. One station actually had a Border Patrol agent making sure that the temperature of the burritos were correct, because that was challenged. The temperature in the holding facilities, I'm not making up. The temperature of holding facilities has to be within, I think, a 7-degree range. They complained that the snacks that were being provided to them, because they have to have an opportunity to have 6 meals a day, that the snacks, they had them in a container, like a wall locker, and they said, no, they've got to be accessible. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that they're doing. And so the Border Patrol agents, not only do they have to receive them, right, at the border, take them, transport them, and like you said, sometimes they can be a long ways away. Once they're there, they got to process them. They have to screen them medically. They have to feed them. They have to clothe them. And then because there's not enough resources, right, ICE doesn't have enough space, HSS doesn't have enough space, then a lot of times Border Patrol is like, okay, what do we do with them now? And so that's when you take them to those other facilities that you've seen, that there are cages and stuff. And guess who runs those, Daniel? Border Patrol. I had a Border Patrol, and I was there in RGV. I had a Border Patrol, 18 years, walk up to me, and he said, Chief, hey, I'm not complaining, but he goes, I never thought, after 18 years of being a Border Patrol agent, that my primary job would be to make sure I had enough baby formula and baby diapers and et cetera.
Wow.
So that is a huge issue. The United States Border Patrol are absolutely doing a humanitarian mission. They're being daycare providers, child care providers, and it's taking them off the front lines of our borders to go against the coyotes and the cartels to protect this nation. That's an issue, and it just does not get addressed enough.
So it seems like a no-brainer that if you tag a certain area for this activity, which, we see a couple places, but certainly in Hidalgo County, New Mexico, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that in the ranches along the border, you're going to be seeing a lot of criminal activity while that's going on.
Daniel, yes, all of this is a no-brainer, right? None of this discussion on border security is complicated. None of it. And the Border Patrol experts, the men and women that risk their lives, 128 today have died, securing our borders. They have been saying forever that the strategy is infrastructure, technology, and personnel. You have that in the right areas, the right location, at the right level of the mix of those three, you're going to stop stuff by 90%. It's fact, it's provable, and they've been saying it for a long time. I'm sorry, I don't want to be political, but the truth is the Democrats, on a bipartisan way, have voted for the wall, have voted for a physical barrier multiple times. And now it's immoral and ineffective. I mean, the 2009 Chuck Schumer, he gave a speech to Georgetown University. So remember, 2006, the Secure Fence Act, where 654 miles of physical barrier were built along the southwest border. In 2009, he actually gave a speech to Georgetown University where he applauded how effective security barriers were. And now it's immoral and ineffective. That's why I'm frustrated. That's why I'm here trying to educate the American people.
It's all the politics. It's unbelievable. And sadly, everyone thought that, we reopened government, we're now paying the agents. But isn't it true that this is the ultimate shutdown of the Border Patrol, that we haven't reopened yet? They're still shut down from their core mission.
Right. That's absolutely right. And they're not given the resources that they need. I mean, if you think about it, in the president's plan, which I actually call it's the experts plan, the president just happens to be listening to the experts on the plan, and he's communicated that to the American people. The plan that's out there is not just the president's plan; it is the experts' plan. And if you actually read the plan, this false narrative is so old about sea to shining sea and a wall, the size and depth of the wall of China. That is so gone. The experts have never wanted that and never said that, and nor is the president saying that. In his State of the Union address, he said steel slats in areas that the experts say it's needed, and that's exactly what we need to do. Why is Congress not listening to the experts to say, here's the tools we need? Why? Instead, they're saying, you know what? We'll tell you what tools you need. And get this. So they haven't done that in the past. In the past, bipartisan, they listened to the experts. The only reason why the 2013 bill failed in the House was because it was attached to amnesty. But the part of the bill that the Senate passed had $8 billion in there for fencing. That's not complicated. This should be a no-brainer. Actually, what Congress should be asking the experts is, you only need 5.7? How about 10 billion? Because we want to stop little girls and young women from being trafficked. We want to stop the cartels from pushing 90% of the heroin that's leading to overdoses and deaths in the United States. I don't get why identity politics is being put in front of the safety and security of our country, Daniel. No one will get me to understand why that's happening.
I've had so many sheriffs on the show, other law enforcement, and it seems like you guys all talk the same, that, you're more concerned about obviously the public policy as a whole than scoring any political points, but it's almost like there's nothing that's not politicized anymore, which it's just so sad. I got to send you that clip from the New Mexican governor. It's pretty unbelievable. She talks about how we're only gonna implement proven evidence-based security, and won't define what that is, of course.
And what I would say is we have it. And again, equally frustrating is the first day after the conference committee met, there was actually a congressperson that got out and actually said the only crisis at the border is humanitarian. You completely rejected that there's any threat to our country at the southwest border. I mean, again,
well, that's identity.
How do you have a negotiation?
That's identity. I mean, you're not allowed to care about your own people. That's really what it seems.
Right.
I mean, it certainly is true that the cartels exploit some some of the foreign nationals as well. But I mean, when you don't hear the cry out from the ranchers, and again, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, it's not just the border ranchers. It's New York City, it's Boston, it's North Carolina, it's all over the East Coast.
It's all over the country, Daniel, and that's what I'm hoping and I'm praying that it's resonating more and more with the American people, and the polls are showing that. But it's just unbelievable to me. And again, like you said, I want to be apolitical, but when you have politicians stand at the podium and say the wall is immoral and ineffective, that is a lie. It's disingenuous on the immoral part because they have voted for it in the past. Both of those individuals who said that have voted for the wall in the past. And it's a lie when it's ineffective, when they know it's effective. You know, it's ironic when one of them has a lot of wall, in fact, secondary, tertiary level of wall in her home state. And that is what is disingenuous.
Yeah, it's really sad. I know you have a prior engagement, so we'll let you go now, but we certainly have to have you back as this unfolds. We need your voice in the fight. Thanks so much for coming out of your quiet retirement and fighting the good fight for us.
Absolutely, Daniel. You too. And anytime you ask, I'll be here.
Certainly appreciate it. Well, folks, that was Mark Morgan, former Border Patrol, and I think you hear the sincerity in Mark's voice. He really is apolitical. I mean, he was canned by Obama, by Trump. So anyone else in his position would be out there trashing him. Oh, I mean, could you imagine the fame he would get by saying, oh, I'm a former Border Patrol chief, and I could tell you the wall is BS. You know, that's what anyone would have done to get back at a president who fired him. But instead, he's like, look, this needs to be done. But that's the thing. You're not seeing this urgency from Republicans and McConnell. His only urgency is don't pull troops out of Afghanistan. I wanted to talk to him more about the mechanics of how troops would work together with Border Patrol at the border and what his thoughts on that were. But we'll have to get that for another time. Anyway, it is great to be back with you, back in the thick of the fight, even though I'm kind of depressed being back from vacation. A lot more going on this and other issues. But we will now have more for you back in the saddle. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere anytime soon, unless I get burned out. But God bless y'all. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of The Conservative Conscience.